Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?
Talking about evil in the hearts of men, let's read an article written by David Martin from the 21st of October. All about the Antichrist. With all the controversy that surrounded the election of Pope Francis upon the resignation of Pope Benedict in 2013, it seems that Catholics may have lost sight of a key element in this episode, namely that Benedict XVI never resigned his papal office, but only the active exercise thereof. On the eve of his resignation, he said, "Anyone who accepts the Petrine ministry no longer has any privacy. He belongs always and completely to everyone, to the whole church. The always is also a forever. There can no longer be a return to the private sphere. My decision to resign the active exercise of the ministry does not revoke this." That was from the general audience he gave of February the 27th, 2013, the day before the door to his active ministry was closed. Now, according to these words, Benedict XVI remains Pope with no revocation of his office having occurred. According to church law, a Pope must give up his office for his resignation to be valid. Pope Benedict clearly chose to retain his office forever, which means he is still Pope, which means that Francis cannot be Pope, since there cannot be two popes. The late Fatima expert Father Nicholas Gruner points this out in a rare video on Pope Benedict XVI's resignation. If Francis is the Pope, then Benedict's office is revoked. But Benedict insists it was not revoked. To explain why the papal chimera that was born of the historic 2013 conclave, Archbishop Georg Swain, who serves as prefect of the pontifical household, told the press that Benedict XVI's resignation announcement on February 11th, 2013, marked the introduction of a new institution into the Catholic Church, a de facto enlarged ministry with both an active and a contemplative member. He said the Petrine office is now a common papacy, comprising more than one member, that is, Benedict and Francis. Unfortunately, there is no such thing as a shared papacy, and Swain no doubt realises that this is an argument used by heretics to undermine the primacy of Peter, but his explanation to the press apparently was the best he could do to cover for a very embarrassing situation that caused the man he honoured to be dethroned. Now I'm coming in here because we're going to go over to another tab to find out when it was that Archbishop Georg Swain actually spoke those words to the world, and then I'll tell you why when we come back. Let's see if there's any date on this. Yes, September the 13th, 2016. Papal Secretary Archbishop Gan Swain speaks on Benedict the Two Popes and prophecy. All right, what I am going to fill you in, I haven't read this article, it was just that I clicked on the hyperlink leading to it, these being the words of Gan Swain himself. We'll go back to the main article because I would like to point out to you all that after Benedict announced Yah through his Facebook page, and it was actually before he wrote the apostolic letter that was uploaded to the internet on March 26, 2013. It was Yah who told him over and over, I do not accept your resignation, you are still the Pope, etc. Now, in the approach to Francis, it was just after the private meeting of March the 23rd. He was given 5 days to get used to the news that Benedict told him, which was, I've been communicating with the Christ. His name is Brian Leonard Golightly Marshall. He's a wonderful, funny man, and he's in to them. And by the way, he has written Vatican III for the restoration of the church. Francis, of course, in the meeting, dumbstruck, rejects both Benedict's news, the news that he was telling, and also Vatican III. We all know this. It's recorded in Vatican III, the apostolic letter called in Christian Credo. However, we gave Francis 5 days to get used to the news, and it was Archbishop Georg Gan Swain, when asked by Father Giuseppe Ciavello, after I asked Father Giuseppe, what does Georg say, where is Francis's head is at? So 5 days later, Georg Gan Swain reports to us that sadly, Francis still rejects the news. So what happened? In that 5 days, Yah presented a video to Francis, giving him the opportunity and calling him my two popes. He came into, if he accepted this, that he would rule along with Benedict as the two popes. So this is where Gan Swain is coming forward with this changing of the ministry to become the two popes. It came from Yah himself. So we go back to this article that David Martin is writing from the traditional Catholic Church militant, with no understanding that this is the exchange that has come forward, because Francis himself has kept the news out of the press and away from the world. But Gan Swain is operating on that premise. Now, there have been certain things that I recognise that Francis has been trying to introduce that is straight out of what Yah wrote in Vatican III for Benedict. That is that people who have divorced, because God is love, and when there is no love in a marriage and people are unequally yoked, that should not condemn them to be out of communion with their Lord because the church rules it so. So that was a correction that Yah implemented in Vatican III, along with the dealing with homosexuality and pedophilia, etc., the child abusers, all of those things. Vatican III in the link below, you can read it and you can see how very simply Yah wrote Vatican III, the 49 canons, to bring about the restoration not only of the church, but the people that they are dealing with. Those that want to take communion, but the church says no because of their antiquated. So anyway, bottom line is, Francis is fighting all of these battles because he has not told the world, as Benedict did, that they are following Yah's instructions in Vatican III. So we've got people like this David Martin writing through ignorance, and then what it boils down to is that Benedict XVI was forced into abdicating. This is what this writer says, that is to give up the active ministry, but this was done under the guise of a resignation to not split the bark asunder with controversy. Credible reports from 2015 indicate that Benedict XVI was coerced into stepping down, which was providentially foreshadowed in Pope Benedict's inaugural speech of April 24, 2005, when he said, "Pray for me that I may not flee for fear of the wolves." We know from Cardinal Daniels of Brussels that he, so we're talking about Daniels, was part of a radical mafia reformist group opposed to Benedict XVI. Daniels, known for his support of abortion, LGBT rights and gay marriage, said in a taped interview in September 2015 that he and several cardinals were part of this mafia club that was calling for drastic changes in the church to make it much more modern, and that the plan was to have Cardinal George Bergoglio as head of it. This infamous clique, which is documented in Austin Inveray's book, The Great Reformer, comprised key members of the Vatican gay lobby that had clamoured for Pope Benedict's resignation, the same members who stirred up so much chaos at the October 2014 and 2015 synods on the family. Inveray's book brings to light the intense lobbying campaign that was spearheaded by Cardinal Murphy O'Connor to get Cardinal Bergoglio elected as Pope. Up to 30 cardinals were involved. According to Inveray, they first secured Bergoglio's assent, and then they got to work touring the cardinals' dinners to promote their man. This was confirmed in the case of Cardinals Murphy O'Connor and Cardinal O'Malley in the Wall Street Journal report from August 6, 2013. As the conclave neared, they then held a series of closed meetings known as congregations, one of which featured Cardinal Bergoglio as the keynote speaker. Clearly there was intense politics and vote canvassing at work around the time of the conclave, which directly violated Pope John Paul II's apostolic constitution, which lays down the rules for conducting conclaves. Therein he makes it clear that vote canvassing among cardinal electors is strictly forbidden, and that it renders the election null and void. Key passages are as follows. The cardinal electors shall further abstain from any form of pact, agreement, promise, or other commitment of any kind which could oblige them to give or deny their vote to a person or persons. If this were in fact done even under oath, I decree that such a commitment shall be null and void, and that no one shall be bound to observe it. And I hereby impose the penalty of excommunication latae centenariae upon those who violate this prohibition. 82. I likewise forbid the cardinals before the election to enter into any stipulations committing themselves of common accord to a certain course of action, should one of them be elevated to the pontificate. These promises too, should any in fact be made even under oath, I also declare null and void. 76. Should the election take place in a way other than that prescribed in the present constitution, or should the conditions laid down here not be observed, the election is for this very reason null and void, without any need for a declaration on the matter. Consequently, it confers no right on the one elected. So that was from February the 22nd, 1996. So bearing this in mind, let us consider now the prophecy, now get a load of this, as a catch-22 if you like, the namesake of Francis, St. Francis of Assisi, concerning a future pope. This is found in the Opuscula, or Works of St. Francis, which was published by the preeminent Franciscan historian Father Luke Wadding in 1621. Shortly before his death in 1226, St. Francis of Assisi called together the friars of his order and detailed this prophecy of what was to come upon the church in the latter days. The following is an excerpt taken from Works of the Seraphic Father St. Francis of Assisi, R. Washburn, 1882, page and paragraph, pages 248 to 250, and anyway, it goes on. Quoting St. Francis of Assisi, "At the time of this tribulation, a man not canonically elected will be raised to the pontificate, who by his cunning will endeavour to draw many into error. Some preachers will keep silence about the truth, and others will trample it underfoot and deny it. Sanctity of life will be held in derision, even by those who outwardly profess it. For in those days Jesus Christ will send them not a true pastor, but a destroyer." So this is me cutting in. This is what Francis has become. Instead of becoming Yah's man, along with Pope Benedict, he has chosen to reject both Benedict and Yah himself, and he is a destroyer, all brought about by his cunning. The clearest evidence of an uncanonically elected pope would be his success in drawing many into error, something that has become rampant since Francis was elected. We see many in the church talking down dogma, praising Luther, that is Martin Luther, and even dignifying adultery, courtesy of amorous Laetitia, which teaches that we can now break the commandments if conscience dictates. And whereas some argue that this is material and not formal heresy, how do they explain apparent formal heresy contained in paragraph 297 of Amoris Laetitia? Now this is the letter, the apostolic letter, written by Pope Francis. So Francis has written this. No one can be condemned forever, because that is not the logic of the gospel here. Here I am not speaking only of the divorced and remarried, but of everyone in whatever situation they find themselves. Now, I would say there that Yah was speaking specifically about the divorced and remarried being able to take communion. God is love. He is not talking about homosexual or erotic love. He is talking about, this is Yah, he is talking about the sacred love between a man and his wife. If there is no love between them, then they are not bound. There are many reasons that there is no love between them. So Yah has extended the grace of divorce and then remarriage, being able to become communicants, taking communion within the church. Francis, however, has extended that in whatever situation they find themselves of everyone, and I would imagine that he is extending it towards homosexual love, which is absolutely abhorrent. This clearly denies the church's dogmatic teaching that hell is eternal. So here we go on the teaching of the church. In an interview with Catholic World Report in December 2016, Cardinal Raymond Burke, who is presently a member of the Apostolic Signatura, said that if a pope were to formally profess heresy, he would cease by that act to be the pope. Burke was reiterating church teaching as expressed by famed canonist Franz Wernth, quoting, "In sum, it needs to be said clearly that a publicly heretical Roman pontiff loses his power upon the very act." Now remember, Cardinal Raymond Burke, who has been informed, they all know that Yah is back. They are preaching only from the dogma of the church that you would expect the Christ to correct when he is back. So based upon their own understanding of whether the church dogma is, forget Yah's Vatican III, that Francis has already become a heretic just by uttering or penning the words that he has. There is also the issue of Francis. Now, this is what concerns ourselves from Yah's perspective and the rest of the world. There is also the issue of Francis' ongoing collusion with the United Nations globalists, and we're talking about the elite. We're talking about the cabal, the New World Order, the Jew World Order. Freemasons the world over praise Francis and see him as a hero for the way he has turned the Vatican into a bully pulpit for the advancement of left-wing political causes like population control, open borders, and a communistic one-world government. Now, Yah himself in Vatican III has announced already on issues regarding contraception, etc. He has clearly pointed out within the document that Yah himself, it's inhumane for the poorest of the poor to be bringing children into the world when they're going to starve to death because the Jews who are controlling the world are not distributing the wealth to the people who are born into the nations that own the wealth. It's all about... Now, I want to point this out too because there are many out there who are working and they're, doing these wonderful things for their Lord, ignoring the fact that Yah is here, even though they have been told categorically he is here. But they are going on trying to dismantle the system and finding out what a system it is. However, Yah has said all along, you let evil build the system, I will just take it over. The system itself does not need to be dismantled. Yah takes it over. So once God is in control of the system, then all men will have men, women and children will have everything that they need to live within the conditions of paradise with God in control for the first time in all of mankind's history. Do you understand that? For all of those trying to dissemble the system, it's a takeover, which is why, as Jesus, the temptation in the wilderness, where Satan takes him up and shows him all the kingdoms of the world, he turns them down. Why? Because it wasn't that world at that time. It is, however, the world at this time when evil has built the systems of the world that Yah takes over the systems of the world. Would you not expect the Christ to do that? So we've got many groups, free man groups, whatever you want to call them, trying to dismantle the straw man systems to release the souls from under the control of Lucifer and all the rest of it, the slave conditions, blah, blah, blah. Yes, that is how the Jews, who are the synagogue of Satan, have controlled everybody. But guess what? It's really simple. Yah takes it over and brings relief to everybody on the planet using their system, which really does work very well. All right, so let's move on. The big and obvious question, and this is a very fair question, remains, if Benedict XVI in fact remains Pope, why doesn't he alert the Church to the nullity of Francis' election? And why did he even consent to the 2013 conclave if he already knew his continued papacy would invalidate the election? This is where it goes into... Perhaps the late Father Malachi Martin provided the answer to this in summer of 1998. In an interview on the Art Bell show, Father Malachi stated that he read The Third Secret of Fatima in February 1960, bound by oath not to reveal the text of the secret. He commented on the basic gist of the secret, that is, its prediction of apostasy in the Church, while refuting the various apocryphal versions that callers were quoting to him on the program, and by that meaning the fire from heaven to destroy humanity, etc. It's about the apostasy in the Church. According to Fatima experts, No, however, in response to an alleged quotation from the Third Secret about a pope who would be under the control of Satan, Father Malachi replied, yes, it sounds as if they were reading the text of the Third Secret. According to Fatima experts, including the late Father Nicholas Gruner, this mention of a pope under Satan's control would mean that he is innocently bound and kept under control. Benedict won't speak the truth about Rome's present collusion with Antichrist because he is bound by fears and kept under surveillance by an ironclad Vatican bureaucracy, if in fact they haven't threatened him at gunpoint. There could be more to Daniel's mafia club than meets the eye. This is credible when we consider that on February the 10th, 2012, almost 1 year to the day before Benedict XVI announced his resignation, it was reported that the Pope was given only 1 year to live if he didn't resign. The Telegraph UK reported that Cardinal Paolo Romeo, Archbishop of Palermo, said these things to a group of people in Beijing toward the end of 2011. His remarks were expressed with such certainty and resolution that the people he was speaking to thought with a sense of alarm that an attack on the Pope's life was being planned. Now that link to the report comes up with the Telegraph reporting. If I press on it, open in a new tab, we'll let it go there. The extraordinary comments were written up in a top secret... Alright, just bear with me until the page comes back. This is so painful. Alright, so here is the link to the Telegraph article. From 2012, the Pope will die within a year, etc., etc., etc. So, let's see when that was. So, yes, 10th of February 2012 by Nick Squires from Rome. The sensational prediction was allegedly made by, and it goes on, I'll switch back to the previous tab because it covers it. Here we go, back over to, right, yeah. Alright, so here we go. The extraordinary comments were written up in a top secret report dated December the 30th, 2011 and delivered to the Pope. So we're talking about Benedict by a senior cardinal, Dario Castrillon Hoyos, in January 2012. The report was written in German, apparently to limit the number of people within the Vatican who would understand if it was inadvertently leaked. It warned of a Maud complot, death plot against Benedict. Hence, Pope Benedict XVI, in an emotional farewell speech at St. Peter's on February the 25th, 2013, told a crowd of 100,000 that God had called him to step down and devote himself to prayer and to scale the mountain. Now, this leads into another vision, this time by Sister Lucy of Fatima. This suggests that Benedict XVI is the Holy Father in Lucy's vision who scales the mountain, while Francis is the bishop dressed in white, in conjunction with the third secret message. Sister Lucy of Fatima received this symbolic vision, which she penned. Now note this date, January the 3rd, 1944, so it's 8 days before Yar is born. The following is an excerpt of the vision which was published by the Vatican on June the 26th, 2000. So this is during the reign of John Paul II. Quoting Sister Lucy, we saw an immense light that is God, something similar to how people appear in a mirror when they pass in front of it. A bishop dressed in white we had the impression that it was the Holy Father. Other bishops, priests, men and women religious, going up a steep mountain, at the top of which there was a big cross of rough-hewn trunks, as of a cork tree with the bark. Before reaching there, the Holy Father passed through a big city, half in ruins and half trembling with halting step. Afflicted with pain and sorrow, he prayed for the souls of the corpses he met on his way. Having reached the top of the mountain on his knees at the foot of the big cross, he was killed by a group of soldiers who fired bullets and arrows at him. And in the same way there died one after another the other bishops, priests, men and women religious, and various lay people of different ranks and positions. Beneath the two arms of the cross there were two angels, each with a crystal aspersorium in his hand, in which they gathered up the blood of the martyrs, and with it sprinkled the souls that were making their way to God. The writer of this, David Martin, in her vision, Lucy sees two popes, as it were. The first is a mirrored image of what appears to be the Pope, but is actually a bishop dressed in white, who gives the impression he is the Pope. The true Pope and his followers scale the mountain amidst peril and danger, praying for the spiritually dead along the way, before which they pass through a city half in ruins, representing the church in shambles. At the end of their journey, they are martyred for their allegiance to Jesus crucified. It is a symbolic picture of the church being put to death. It should be emphasized that a reflection in the mirror is not a reality, but only an appearance, an impression. Lucy makes the point that this appearance is a bishop dressed in white. Given what we know, it is safe to say that the bishop dressed in white is not Benedict XVI or any previous pope, but Pope Francis. When we consider all the above, it begins to shed light on the mystery as to why Saint Faustina was a Polish nun who lived throughout the 20th century, known for her role in establishing the devotion to the Divine Mercy, penned an unusual entry into her diary. Note this date, December the 17th, 1936. Entry number 823 is as follows. I have offered this day for priests. I have suffered more today than ever before, both interiorly and exteriorly. I did not know it was possible to suffer so much in one day. I tried to make a holy hour, in the course of which my spirit had a taste of the bitterness of the Garden of Gethsemane. I am fighting alone, supported by his arm, against all the difficulties that face me like unassailable walls. But I trust in the power of his name, and I fear nothing. It is significant to note that Saint Faustina on that day was making reparation for priests, an offering that brought upon her the worst suffering she had ever endured, and perhaps the worst she would ever endure. But too, on that bitter day of December the 17th, 1936, was born George Mario Bergoglio, who would later reign as Pope Francis, the 266th Pontiff of the Roman Catholic Church. Could it be on that day Saint Faustina was atoning for the many priests, bishops and cardinals of the future that would be misled by Francis? But too, could it be that her mysterious torment that day signalled the arrival of a future antipope? So again, I say to you, it was not only a future antipope, but the Antichrist himself in Bergoglio. Now, Yar is not concerned with the priests being in error concerning church dogma, because the Christ corrects church dogma. However, going back in the prophecy spoken of by St. Francis of Assisi, it is that the truth would be trampled underfoot. And what truth is that? At the time of this tribulation, a man, this is Francis, not canonically elected, will be raised to the pontificate, who by his cunning will endeavour to draw many into error. Some preachers will keep silence about the truth, and others will trample it underfoot and deny it. This is the truth that Benedict proclaimed, that the Christ is indeed returned, and his name, new name of the revelation, Brian Leonard Golightly Marshall, Yahweh Jesus. This is the truth that they are trampling underfoot and or denying it. And we know that they know all about it because I informed the College of Cardinals before the conclave. Jonas from Sydney, Australia, travelled all the way to the Vatican in September of 2014 and confirmed with a German cardinal in St. Peter's Square. As John pushed into the cardinal's face the Italian translation of Benedict's apostolic letter, John saying to this man, "Is this true? Is this true?" The cardinal confirming, "Yes, it is true." And his next words were, "Poor Benedict." So it is for these that Francis is drawing these cardinals, these bishops, these priests, everybody drawn into error. They will keep silence about the truth of what? That the Christ is returned and announced by Benedict, and others will trample it underfoot and deny it. Georg Ganswein calls it a fairy tale. George Ratzinger, Pope Benedict's own brother, coached by Ganswein, I would say, calls the return of Christ a fairy tale. They are trampling the truth underfoot and denying it. And yes, sanctity of life will be held in derision even by those who outwardly profess it. For it has been proclaimed even in the headlines that Francis regards pedophilia as secondary to whatever agenda he is trying to bring about through the Vatican. So because Francis became the Antichrist rather than his other pope working with Pope Benedict to announce the Christ and bring about the restoration of the church under the rule of the rod of iron, which is the Christ, Francis is the Antichrist, and for that reason Saint Faustina had the worst day of her life in her devotions on the day that Bergoglio, the Antichrist, Lucifer itself, came to the earth. So with that, we'll end right here. And I've just learned about the Windows 10 having a recording, screen recording, that's all part of Windows. It's for gamers. So instead of having to pay to continue with screen recording, here it is. Anyway, I would just beseech all of you who know that Yah is here, all of you, to be praying for Benedict in Yah's new name, his strength, his health, and that he would have angelic visitations, that now is the time for him to speak up. Some way, somehow, find the way to speak up the truth. Enough is enough.